We train champions, not foster the dreams of refugees.
Ingrid Solheim, two-time European champion, shouted across the National Boxing Center in Oslo. No one spoke. Every gaze turned toward the door. A small girl stood there, thin, dark-skinned, her faded jacket hanging loosely on her shoulders. A torn gym bag, patched with a hair tie, dangled from her hand. She said nothing, just stared at the floor, gripping the strap as if letting go would make her disappear. Oslo, winter 2023. Snow fell so thick that the city seemed swallowed by silence. Inside the National Boxing Gym, cold air seeped through the cracks, mixing with the sound of gloves striking sandbags. Thump, thump, thump. Steady, dry, echoing like the heartbeat of those who never stop. At the center of the ring was Ingrid Solheim, European champion for 2 consecutive years. Her blonde hair tied high, her body hard and honed, every punch sharp and precise as a blade. She was born into fame, the media's darling, the ice princess of Norway. No one ever dared disturb her training, until the door burst open. A gust of icy wind swept in, carrying flakes of snow. A girl stepped through, small, slender, her faded coat hanging loose. Over her shoulder hung a torn gym bag, its zipper replaced with a tied-off strand of elastic. All eyes turned to her, as though a drop of ink had fallen onto white paper. Her voice trembled slightly, blending Norwegian and English. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Mr. Evanson. They told me I was accepted into the scholarship program." No answer. A few men paused mid-punch, exchanging smirks. Ingrid turned, eyes the color of winter lakes. "What did you say? Scholarship?" "Yes," the girl nodded, gripping the strap tighter. "The immigrant support program. I applied 3 months ago." Ingrid's lips curled. "Immigrant?" She gave a dry laugh, stepping closer, her shoes hitting the floor like hammers. "Listen, girl. This is the National Training Center. We train real athletes, not social projects." The words sliced the air in half. Some of the boxers nearby stifled laughs, eyes down but amused. The girl said nothing. Snow still drifted outside, and under the pale lights, her dark skin glowed almost painfully against the white. "What's your name?" Ingrid asked, her tone like a challenge. "Leyla Abdikarim. Somalia?" "Yes." "How lovely. A girl from Nairobi thinking she can walk in here because a few papers say equality. How adorable." The room burst into laughter. Then Coach Lars Evanson, a man in his 60s, hair silver as frost, face lined with exhaustion, stepped out of his office. "That's enough, Ingrid," he said, his voice low but firm. "This girl is on the Federation's approved list. From today, she trains here." Ingrid turned, half shocked, half disdainful. "Really, Lars? You're turning this place into a refugee camp?" "I'm turning it into a place for those brave enough to walk through that door, no matter where they come from." The room went still. Ingrid narrowed her eyes, stepping closer to Leyla, a crooked smile on her lips. "Then prove it, Somali girl. If you want to stay, show us what you're worth." "What do you mean?" Lars asked. 3 rounds, Ingrid said coldly. "A light spar. If she survives, she stays. If not, she goes back to her camp." Everyone knew it wasn't going to be light. It was a silent elimination, Ingrid's way of humiliating anyone who dared threaten her throne. Leyla looked around. No one spoke. She took a slow breath. Her shoulders trembled, not from fear, but from cold. Then she said softly, like falling snow, "I accept." The gym erupted. Someone muttered, "She's insane." "Ingrid will crush her in a minute." Lars stepped forward, resting a hand on Leyla's shoulder, his voice low. "You don't have to do this. Ingrid is a real champion." "I know," Leyla replied. "But if I back down, they'll think I came here for pity." Ingrid heard it and laughed under her breath. "Good. At least you've got some pride left." She turned to her teammate. Get the 16-ounce gloves. No referee. I can handle it. 5 minutes later, the central ring blazed with light. Leyla stood with her head bowed, wearing borrowed red gloves, frayed at the seams. Across from her, Ingrid looked like a marble statue in her pristine white gear. The crowd tightened around the ropes. A young sports journalist raised his phone to record the perfect viral clip. Champion teaches immigrant a lesson. Lars tried once more. 3 rounds, Ingrid. Don't push it. Relax, she said coolly. I just want to teach her about reality. The first bell rang. The first punch and the first counter would define everything. Leyla raised her guard, moving slow, her footwork low and fluid. Not European at all, but the kind of street-born rhythm that flowed more from instinct than training. Ingrid lunged forward immediately, throwing a left jab, then a right cross. The air cracked with whoosh whoosh. But Leyla slipped. She didn't even look, just leaned her body, stepped half a beat back. The punch grazed her cheek by a breath. Then came a lightning counter. Thwack! The sound of glove on forehead rang out, short and sharp. Ingrid froze for a heartbeat. The gym erupted. A few boxers' eyes widened. Ingrid clenched her jaw, her stare icy cold. You got lucky. But Leyla said nothing. She just raised her guard again, eyes fixed on her opponent. The fight had only just begun. Ingrid picked up speed. She unleashed a 3-punch combo, driving Leyla into the corner. But instead of retreating, Leyla pivoted, a clean hook to the ribs. The sound was dry and brutal. Ingrid bent slightly, breath breaking for a second. Coach Lars froze by the ropes. What the hell was that? One boxer whispered. She countered like an old-school Muay fighter? No, another replied. That's instinct. She's fought on the streets before. The bell ended the first round. Ingrid stormed back to her corner, face flushed with anger. Leyla stood still, breathing slow, her eyes calm as thawing ice. Round 2 would not be a test. It would be war. Round 2. The air was thick, like cold fog inside the lungs. No one spoke, only the squeak of ropes and the ragged breaths of 2 bodies circling each other. Ingrid charged. She'd abandoned her strategy. Every punch now was a wordless insult thrown with the weight of her wounded pride. Wish, wish, wish. Leyla retreated, neither striking back nor attacking, only dodging. Her footwork was fluid as water, touching the floor as lightly as if she were dancing. But to Ingrid, that calmness was an offense. Stand still, you coward! A right hook sliced past Leyla's ear, missing. Another left cut through the air. Ingrid gritted her teeth, rushing in. But Leyla rolled her hips, tilted her head, and pop! A tight left counter snapped up into Ingrid's chin. A collective gasp rippled through the gym. Ingrid stumbled back, fury flashing in her eyes. You think you're better than me? Leyla didn't answer. She just looked, not with defiance, but with the quiet, worn gaze of someone who had survived places without rules. A brief pause. Then Ingrid came at her again. This time, Leyla didn't dodge. She met her head on. Their arms collided, the force cracking like splintering wood. Ingrid poured all her weight into a right cross. Thud! It slammed into Leyla's shoulder, sending her staggering, one foot slipping slightly. Yeah, someone shouted from the crowd. But before Ingrid could savor it, Leyla snapped back with a short left hook to the ribs. The sound was sickening, like a brick hitting flesh. Ingrid's knees buckled, and for a fraction of a second, Leyla froze. Not out of hesitation, but memory, flashback, Dadaab refugee camp, Kenya. Leyla, age 14, wind whipping sand, tents tearing apart, a group of boys fighting over water rations. One of them slapped her. She fell, hand in the dirt, eyes landing on a plastic bottle lying nearby. That was the first time she hit someone, not for revenge, but to not die of thirst. When the boy went down, she learned something: strike at the right moment and survive. Fall, and you disappear. The present rushed back, the crowd noise, the snow tapping the window. Leyla lifted her head. Her eyes had changed. No fear now, only focus. The next sequence came like thunder. Thwap, thwap, thwap. 3 strikes in a blur. 1 to the gut, 1 to the chin, 1 across the jaw. Ingrid went down. The room fell silent. Lars stepped forward instinctively, stammering. She just dropped Ingrid. Ingrid lay on her side, one hand braced against the floor, eyes wide in disbelief. Blood traced the corner of her lip. She forced herself up, growling. "Don't you walk away! We're not done!" Lars started to intervene, but Leyla stepped back to the center, nodding calmly. "I don't want to fight you, but if you don't stop, I'll have to finish it." "Finish it? You?" Ingrid snarled, swinging again. Leyla slipped sideways, dodged, then answered with a short, surgical uppercut. The sound was like metal snapping. Ingrid flew backward and hit the floor hard. People rushed toward the ring. Lars shouted, "Enough! The fight's over!" But Leyla stood still, her eyes never leaving the woman lying on the floor. She wasn't panting, not sweating, just still. A quiet, icy stillness, as if all her energy had melted into the snow. A young boxer whispered, "God, who is she?" Another replied, "I don't know, but I swear I've never seen anyone move like that." Lars, still shaken, knelt beside Ingrid. "You all right?" Ingrid shoved his hand away, lifting her head to stare at Leyla. In those cold gray eyes, there was no arrogance now, only shock and fear. A bell rang, clang, not from a referee, but from the old clock on the wall, as if signaling that something had changed forever. Leyla removed her gloves, set them gently on the table nearby, and bowed slightly. "Thank you for the opportunity." Then she turned and walked away from the ring. Each step left faint marks of sweat on the wooden floor, traces of a storm that had just passed, leaving silence in its wake. That evening, after the gym closed, Lars sat alone in his office, replaying the footage recorded by the young reporter. He slowed it down, frame by frame. The reaction time, the hip rotation, the strike angles. Everything far beyond amateur level. He whispered to himself, "That girl, she can't be just a beginner." Outside, the streetlights glowed against the falling snow. In their cold blue reflection, Lars's aging face showed something rare, fear mixed with awe. By the next morning, the news had exploded across sports media. European champion defeated by Somali refugee. The hashtag #TheEaster Snowfall Fight flooded Twitter. The clip of Leyla's final uppercut hit 3 million views in just 24 hours. The press split into factions, a triumph of courage, a disgrace to Norwegian sports, immigrant or hidden prodigy. Meanwhile, Ingrid awoke in the medical room, her phone buzzing non-stop. Sponsors, journalists, and an avalanche of mocking messages from social media. She clenched the phone in her hand, then hurled it to the floor, her breath ragged. No one beats Ingrid Solheim. No one. But in the mirror, she saw herself. A swollen face, exhausted eyes, and something she refused to name. Fear. Somewhere else, Leyla was cleaning her small room in the immigrant quarter of East Oslo. She opened her old phone. Hundreds of messages, interview requests. She turned it off, sat by the window, and watched the snow falling white and endless outside. "It's cold here," she murmured. "But cold doesn't kill people. Contempt does." The streetlight cast a pale glow on her cheek. A faint smile crossed her lips. Not the smile of a victor, but of someone who had just reclaimed the right to exist. 3 days after the fight, Oslo was no longer at peace. The story spread like a real storm. Every newspaper carried the same headline: European champion Ingrid Solheim defeated by Somali refugee. The tabloids called it the biggest shock in Nordic sports history. Mainstream outlets debated fairness in national athletics. Social media, as always, turned it into a battlefield. She doesn't belong in a national gym. This proves the strength of diversity and immigration. Ban foreigners from national training centers. The Ice Princess has been struck by lightning. The hashtag Manga Snowfall fight trended across all of Europe. Clips of Leyla's uppercut were edited into memes, slow-motion replays, even parodies. Half of Norway felt proud. A victory for inclusivity. The other half fumed, calling it a stain on national honor. Inside Ingrid Solheim's luxury apartment, the blue light of the screen illuminated her face, pale and frozen. Thousands of comments scrolled before her eyes, each one like a blade. Refugee teaches the champion a lesson in humility. The Ice Princess melts. Karma wears gloves. Ingrid threw her phone onto the couch, stood up, and stepped out onto the balcony. Snow was falling thick and heavy, blurring the city lights. For the first time in her life, she felt that the world outside no longer belonged to her. When her manager called, his voice trembled. "Ingrid, Nike has pulled the contract. Freya too. What did they say?" "They don't want to be associated with any negative image related to racism." Silence. "And the Federation?" "They haven't spoken yet, but I think I understand." She hung up. Below, Oslo lay buried in white, beautiful and merciless. Ingrid looked at the old gloves hanging on the wall, a relic from her first championship. She slammed her fist into the wall. The wood cracked. Blood welled around her knuckles. Across the city, Leyla Abdikarim sat in her small, damp apartment, the table trembling each time the tram passed. Her old phone lay on the table, vibrating constantly. "You make us proud. Please share your journey. We'd like to invite you for an interview." One message made her pause. "Mogadishu camp is proud of you, Lightning Leyla." She smiled faintly, but the smile faded when the door opened. Lars Evanson stepped inside, the only one brave enough to visit her amid the storm of public attention. "Leyla, are you all right?" "I'm fine. All of Norway is talking about you." "I know," she said quietly, her gaze still fixed on the window. "But they talk about me like a phenomenon, not a person." Lars sat down across from her and placed a sheet of paper on the table. At the top was the logo of the World Boxing Federation. "They want to invite you to go pro. Lightweight division, first match in London." Leyla looked down at the document, tracing the words "professional invitation" with her finger. "Why?" "Because you just beat a European champion with flawless technique. Because that video has 50 million views." She was silent. "You think I should accept?" "I think you deserve the right to choose your own path." Leyla leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. "I left Mogadishu so I wouldn't have to fight anymore. But it seems that fighting is the only way people will listen to me." Lars sighed. "Victory can change your life, Leyla, but it can also swallow you whole." That same night, Ingrid sat alone in the empty gym, lights off. She played the recording of the match on the big screen, rewinding again and again to the final strike. Each time she watched it, something inside her broke. Not because of pain, but because of truth. She hadn't lost from lack of skill, but from lack of hunger. Her phone rang. It was her mother, Solveig, her voice gentle. "My dear, sometimes failure is how God makes us see others more clearly. I don't need a sermon, Mom. You need humility, Ingrid." She hung up. Tears came before she could stop them. No one had ever told Ingrid she could be wrong, until a refugee did it without saying a word. The next morning, the world's media began chasing Leyla. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, all wanted to interview the Somali girl who defeated the Ice Princess. Television vans crowded the refugee housing block. Curious neighbors gathered at the door. Lars pushed his way through and pulled Leyla aside. "They want you to say something to the world." "I have nothing to say. If you stay silent, they'll say it for you." That stopped her. She remembered her mother's words years ago in a tent in Mogadishu. If you don't tell your story, someone else will, in a way that makes you disappear. Leyla nodded. All right, but I'll say it my way. That evening, during her first live interview, the host asked, Leyla, how does it feel to defeat a champion? She looked straight into the camera, her voice calm and steady. I didn't fight to defeat anyone. I fought to be seen as human. Silence filled the studio. The host lowered his head. The next day, her words were printed across every front page. I didn't fight to defeat anyone. I fought to be seen as human. Somewhere in Oslo, Ingrid read the headline, her hand trembling. For the first time, she understood why Leyla's punch had landed so hard, because it carried the weight of an entire life spent being underestimated. She looked into the mirror. The reflection staring back was a stranger, no longer a symbol, just a person. Ingrid Solheim, 27 years old, a boxer who once thought she stood above the world, was now just a woman learning how to bow her head. Oslo, 3 months later. The snow had begun to melt. Chunks of ice slid off rooftops, shattering across the sidewalks. The city slowly revealed its shades of gray, smeared and raw, like a washed-out painting. But inside Leyla Abdikarim's mind, the storm had not yet passed. Since the day of the interview, her life had become a whirlwind. Morning training with Lars, afternoon contract signings, evenings spent answering reporters. Her name appeared in every sports paper from London to Nairobi. Brands flooded her inbox, all chasing the same image. The Somali girl, a symbol of resilience. She smiled for the cameras. But one question haunted her. Do they really understand what I'm fighting for? Late at night, when Lars had gone home, Leyla stayed behind in the empty gym, repeating the same sequence. Jab, cross, hook. Each strike was a heavy breath. She no longer saw the punching bag. She saw the faces of those who had called her refugee, outsider, opportunity thief. Sometimes she was afraid of herself, because deep down she knew she was no longer fighting to survive. She was fighting to prove something, and proving can kill the person you used to be. At the same time, on the western edge of the city, Ingrid Solheim lived in a small rented apartment, unrecognized. She avoided cameras, avoided old friends. The public apologies she'd given on television had changed nothing. Fans turned away, sponsors closed their doors, teammates kept their distance. Every day she jogged along the Akerselva River, listening to the sound of snow dissolving into cold water. Each night, she returned to her dim room and stared at the old gloves hanging on the wall. I've become what I used to despise, she thought. A loser. Then one day, she received an email from the National Sports Federation. We invite you to participate in the charity event Fight for Dignity, a fundraising program for refugee children. Special guest Leyla Abdikarim. Ingrid stared at the words for a long time. Her chest tightened. The old pride inside her wanted to delete the message instantly. But another part, a smaller, quieter fragment of humanity, whispered, Go. Some fights don't need gloves. 3 weeks later, Fight for Dignity took place at Oslo Arena, the very ring where Ingrid once reigned. More than 5,000 people filled the stands. On the giant screen, footage played of Leyla's journey, from Dadaab refugee camp to the knockout that shook Europe. In the VIP rows, Ingrid sat quietly in a black coat, face hidden beneath a wool hat. When the MC introduced Leyla, the arena erupted. Spotlights flared, hundreds of lenses turned toward her. She smiled, but her eyes looked tired. Her voice echoed through the microphone, low and steady. 3 months ago, I walked into a gym where no one wanted me. Today, I stand here because I believe real strength isn't in how hard you hit, but in how you use it. Applause thundered. Leyla bowed her head in thanks, then stepped down toward the lower seats. That's when she saw Ingrid, the woman she never thought she'd face again. They looked at each other. No words, Only a gaze. Cold and heavy, like two slabs of ice meeting after a long winter. After the ceremony, Ingrid waited in the corridor, under dim yellow light and the fading scent of stale coffee. When Leyla approached, Ingrid spoke softly. "I didn't think I'd ever have the courage to see you again." "But you came," Leyla replied. "I had to apologize. Not because I lost, but because I failed to see you as human." Leyla was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "When you said that in the gym, this is Norway, not Nairobi, I thought of my mother." "Your mother?" "She died when I was 12, in a shelling attack. That day I promised myself I'd never let anyone decide where I belong again." Ingrid bowed her head. "I see." "No, you don't," Leyla said, meeting her eyes. "When you apologize, the world listens. But when I have to live with prejudice, no one hears me. We don't suffer the same kind of silence." The words stopped Ingrid cold. Then Leyla stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Even so, thank you. Because without you, I might never have found myself again." A tear rolled down Ingrid's cheek, not of humiliation, but release. When the event ended, the organizers made a surprise announcement. Leyla and Ingrid would have a short exhibition match to raise funds. No scoring, just a symbol of reconciliation through sport. The arena lights blazed. The crowd roared. The two women stepped into the ring. No hatred, no social media. Only two human beings who had once hurt each other, now standing face to face, like two mirrors finally aligned. The bell rang. Both women moved slowly, gently. Ingrid threw a light jab. Leyla slipped aside and answered with a soft tap against Ingrid's glove. Not a punch, more like a greeting. The crowd went silent for a few seconds, then erupted in applause. They weren't witnessing a fight. They were watching two souls lay down their weapons. When the final bell sounded, Ingrid stepped forward and raised Leyla's hand high. She spoke into the microphone. "If anyone deserves to be called the queen of this ring, it's her." The audience rose to their feet. Cries of "Leyla, Leyla," mixed with shouts of "respect," echoed through the hall. That night, as snow began falling again over the rooftops of Oslo, Ingrid wrote in her journal, "Some defeats cost us our reputation, but others help us find our soul." Meanwhile, on her way home, Leyla rolled down the car window and breathed deeply. The night air was freezing, yet she felt warmer than ever. When the snow melts, she thought, that's when the ground can turn green again. 3 years later, Oslo, springtime. That year the snow melted early. The trees lining Frogner Park were bursting with fresh green leaves, reflected in the glassy lake. On the outer wall of the Aurora Community Sports Center, silver letters shimmered under the sunlight. "Respect is the language of champions." It was the motto of Leyla Abdikarim, the woman who had once arrived in Norway as a shadow. Now she was the first world lightweight champion with immigrant citizenship and a global symbol of dignity and strength. At that morning's press conference, hundreds of reporters crowded the room. One asked, "Leyla, how does it feel to go from a refugee camp to becoming a worldwide icon?" She smiled softly, her voice light as air. "I don't want to be an icon. I just want to be proof that sometimes what's seen as weakness is the purest kind of strength." Cameras flashed non-stop. She bowed in gratitude and left the hall. Outside, the sun blazed. The last of the snow melted into sparkling streaks along the pavement. On the outskirts of the city, Ingrid Solheim walked into the small training gym at Aurora, where she now coached immigrant children. The place wasn't luxurious, but it was filled with laughter. On the wall hung photos. Leyla holding her championship trophy in Las Vegas. Ingrid smiling beside Somali kids at practice. A 9-year-old boy ran up to her. "Coach Ingrid, I saw your old videos. You were really a European champion?" She smiled, ruffling his hair. "I was. Now I just teach you how to stand tall when you fall." The boy grinned and raised a tiny fist. "I want to be strong like Coach Leyla." "Then start by being strong enough to say sorry." The boy blinked, not quite understanding, but nodded eagerly. Ingrid glanced out the window. Outside, Leyla was training a group of new students, young women from Syria, Sudan, Afghanistan. She stood tall, her hands steady, sunlight glinting on her dark skin. There was nothing left of the refugee she once was, only a calm, powerful, and free woman. That afternoon, Leyla and Ingrid sat by the window, sipping coffee. They spoke little, quietly watching the children train outside. "It's been 3 years," Ingrid said softly. "Yes, time flies. Do you remember that day? The day you called me Somali girl?" Leyla smiled faintly. "Yeah." Ingrid nodded, her gaze distant. "If I could go back, I'd stay silent." "No," Leyla shook her head. "If you'd stayed silent, I'd never have learned how strong I really am." They both laughed. The laughter of two people who had once stood at opposite ends of contempt, now meeting in the middle. Where understanding lives. Later that day, Leyla left early and drove to the coast of Big Doy. Waves rippled gently. Sunlight stretched golden across the sky. She took off her shoes, stepped barefoot into the cold sand, and looked toward the horizon, where the sea met the continent of her birth. "Mother," she whispered, "I survived, not just to exist, but to tell our story." A seagull flew past, its wings cutting the wind like an answer. The breeze tousled her hair, and the fading light brushed her skin like a ribbon of bronze. She remembered being 14, lying awake in the refugee camp, listening to the wind tear through the ripped canvas of her tent. Back then, she'd thought the world was too big to ever remember her. Now she knew. It wasn't the world that had grown smaller. It was her heart that had grown large enough to hold it. A month later, ESPN aired the documentary The Refugee from Snowfall. In the final scene, Leyla sat in a quiet room, pale light illuminating her calm face. The interviewer asked, "If you could say one thing to the little girl you once were, in that refugee camp, what would it be?" Leyla smiled. "Don't be afraid when people look down on you, because one day, that very contempt will be the fuel for your wings." Within the same storm, some are knocked down, others learn to stand tall. Ingrid once believed strength lived in her fists, in titles, in lights and applause. Leyla understood that true strength lives in the heart, where pride melts and resolve is born. Both women had lost, but only one learned how to turn defeat into a path toward justice. Snow still falls over Oslo, white as a blank page. But this time, it doesn't hide mistakes. It records the footprints of those brave enough to keep walking, even when the world once turned its back. If you were Leyla, insulted in a place where you only sought fairness, would you walk away or stand up and prove your worth? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because maybe, inside each of us, there's a small Leyla waiting to be heard. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about injustice and the strength it takes for the unheard to rise.